Let's now take a look at the series of events that occur during the depolarizing and repolarizing phases of an action potential. In this picture we can see all of the various steps, but we're going to look at each one of those steps in more detail in the following slides. During the resting state, as it states here, all voltage-gated sodium and potassium channels are closed. The axon plasma membrane is at the resting membrane potential. There's a small buildup of negative charges along the inside surface of the membrane and an equal buildup of positive charges along the outside surface of the membrane. In this series of pictures we will notice that there are two channels, a potassium channel and a sodium channel. In this series of pictures they're showing two specific gates that are part of the sodium channel, an activation gate and an inactivation gate. This gets a little confusing, so the easiest thing to do in order to understand all this is to simply notice whether or not both of them are open. If both of them are open, then sodium will flow through it. If one or the other of the gates are closed, then sodium of course will not flow through the sodium channel. So in the resting state, as just mentioned, all voltage-gated sodium and potassium channels are closed, and therefore, of course, neither one of these ions is flowing through those channels. During depolarization, the sodium channel activation gates open. So in other words, during depolarization, the sodium channel is open, and as we can see, sodium is going to move into the neuron. When sodium moves into the neuron, then of course the inside of the cell will become less negative, or in other words more positive, as we can see in this bottom diagram. So in other words, when the inside of the cell becomes less negative, more positive, then the membrane becomes depolarized. During the repolarization phase of an action potential, the sodium inactivation gates close and the potassium channels open. So in other words, the bottom line is the sodium gates close and therefore sodium can no longer travel through the membrane, but the potassium channels open. You'll remember that there's a greater concentration of potassium ions inside of the cell compared to the outside of the cell. And since these potassium channels are now open, the potassium ions will diffuse from the inside to the outside. When they diffuse from the inside to the outside, then the inside of the cell is losing a positive charge. So in other words, the inside is becoming less positive, or in other words, more negative. And that's what accounts for the repolarization phase of the action potential, as indicated by this red line here. The repolarization phase continues, and the potassium ions continue to leave the cell. And eventually the resting membrane potential is restored.